So, Jeff, thanks so much for being on the show with me today. Introduce yourself to everybody.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I'm Jeff Hittner. I am the founder of Ambitious Dads, which is really a movement for fathers that are trying to be more than one thing. They're really focused on modern fatherhood and trying to really succeed and lead, not just at work, but at home. And I've interviewed almost, well, at this point, more than 200 fathers to try to really understand the challenges and needs of modern fatherhood and what that sort of entails and how it's evolved, in particular over the last couple decades. And my background is I'm a leadership expert and an executive coach. And so I work with CEOs and leaders and executive teams all around the globe. And about 2.5, 3 years ago, I got really curious as to why the men, in particular, that I was coaching, that I would coach, had zero problems talking about their vision for their businesses, their careers, the strategies that they had, where they work. But when it came to answering that same sort of question around their families and their children, they really drew a blank. And I wanted to understand more about it. And so that led me to do all this research. And it's been amazing. I must say been as selfish an endeavor as it could be, because I have learned so much about fatherhood and how to father differently and how to manage all of my emotions and all the challenges that come with two boys. I have a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old. And as you would imagine, they are constantly in their own development and always changing. And I'm always needing to learn new things, which is probably something I love around being a father as much as anything else. And so, yeah, that's my very long intro.
No, I think that's interesting. I like it when people follow what makes them curious because that's how I stumbled into the secure
Mm.
dad as well. This kind of stuff has always made me curious. So I respect that and I appreciate that.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, man. So today I wanted to talk to you about having big conversations with our kids and what that really means. So, how important is it today in 2026 that dads openly communicate with their children?
It's the only way to create deep connection, right? Like presence, which is what creates connection with our children, involves us communicating with them, right? Maybe at the youngest age, it might just involve sitting down and really being involved in their activity and not yours. But as they start to grow, it involves having a conversation on their terms, at their level, and really being connected through that.
Yeah, man. I'm glad you talked about when they're young, you do this, and then as they get older, you change it just a little bit, right? You can't communicate with a 13-year-old the same way you can with a 3-year-old, even though it kind of feels that way sometimes.
Yeah, I do a lot of work with fathers. I run a program called the Founding Fathers Program, which is a 12-week program to help dads build what I call a fatherhood philosophy. So instead of being reactive, really getting out in front and thinking about, like, how do I want to show up for my children and who do I want to be for them? What values do I want to make explicit that they're really seeing in our family, and a whole host of things in addition to this. And one of the things that we talk about a lot in our program is like defining your quote unquote number one role as a father. And that role changes as your child ages.
Mhm.
So when my kids were 2, 3, 4, I was explicit saying, look, my number one role as your dad is to keep you safe.
Mhm.
Okay. And so when they would be trying to jump off the kitchen table onto the ground, and I had said, no, you cannot do that. And they would say, why? I would say, because remember, what's my number one job? And they'd be like, to keep us safe. And I would say, exactly. And that would end actually a lot of the arguments a lot faster. And then as they got older, though, like that didn't become my number one role. I would change it. So now I talk about my number one role as their dad to help them learn and grow and develop. And I talk about it very explicitly in terms of emotional growth and development, and at school, their academic growth and development. And I also expect that to change. As they become teenagers, the role will be different. It's more of like an advisor because they're not going to listen to you if you're a teacher. So I'm always thinking about like how we connect in different ways with our kids as they approach sort of different developmental milestones.
I like that a lot. That makes a lot of sense. One of the things that I feel sometimes as a dad that I personally avoid, and I know other dads listening will probably think this too. Why is it that dads avoid these big, crucial conversations?
There's no single reason. I would say a couple of them that come up is one, um, I think this misunderstanding that by bringing up the conversation, you are encouraging whatever bad behavior is maybe, part of the conversation you want to talk about avoiding, whether it's drugs or sex or online XYZ, right? I think that's one thing. And all of the, um, all of the science and research says that's just 100% not true. And in particular, it's not true because we know our kids are out there doing it either on their own because the internet is the Wild West or with their peers. So we do need to have these conversations with them as quickly as possible. And the data is there on any topic. So you can see, if the topic is sex, well, the average boy in America, depending on what website you go to, is exposed to basic pornography on the internet at 9 years old if you're a boy, 11 or 12 if you're a girl. These numbers vary from different websites, but like you need to know what when those average exposures happen to decide how you're going to reduce risk by then having conversations. And, with ChatGPT now, there's another reason why there's absolutely no excuse to be afraid of the conversation because you're not prepared for it. And I think that's the other reason dads don't have this conversation is they don't know how to be prepared for it. Now, one of the coolest things that ChatGPT or any of these AI interfaces can do for you as a parent is you can plug in I need to have conversation XYZ with my kids. They are 8 years old. They are 12 years old. Help me frame this conversation, knowing that they are that age. And you will get a wonderful set of ideas for how to have this conversation at their level. And that's true for everything. I mean, my children and I were on a flight probably a couple of months ago now, and they wanted to know why it was colder and not hotter as the airplane got higher in the air since we are getting closer to the sun. I had no freaking clue. So I asked ChatGPT to explain it to me as if I was an 8-year-old why it got colder, not hotter, as we got higher in the sky. And it gave me a fantastic answer. And so my point is like it's not just the hard conversations, it's for any conversations. It's fantastic for framing um, how to make it relevant to their age demographic. And you can even talk about like, I'm going to talk to my 12-year-old daughter about sex or my 10-year-old son. I mean, you can do it, based on if they're boys or girls or all of these things. So there's just that other big excuse I feel like is gone.
Mm.
And then there's even more ways to practice once you have a script. So all of these things are possible. They just take effort. And I think we hide behind um, fear that we're going to get them excited to do the thing we don't want to talk about, that we aren't prepared to have that conversation. And those two reasons, as I've just explained, really aren't good enough.
Right, right. I've said, in talking about fire safety for the home, because a lot of people don't wanna think about what happens if their home catches on fire. That's an awful situation, it's terrible. And I tell them just because you have smoke detectors and a fire extinguisher doesn't mean that you are willing your house to catch on fire. You are just trying to be prepared for the moment that something may go wrong so you can minimize that risk.
Yeah.
So, like, just because you're talking about it doesn't mean that you're gonna manifest it. And so
Yeah.
that's a really good point.
Great way to frame it. That's absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, do you think our anxiety that we have as fathers rubs off on our kids?
Yeah, I think any emotion that we have as a parent will rub off on our children. But it's okay in a couple of senses. So the first is we are imperfect and we will constantly make mistakes with our kids and we will constantly have our own big emotions that aren't, meeting the moment or the situation. And that's why we have something called repair, which is literally after that moment has passed, you teach your kids about apologizing. Look, I tried. I really didn't handle that situation well. I'm trying, but I just want to apologize. One of the things I do with my kids in particular is I tell them, like, this is something that daddy is working on. So I'm working on changing my tone, and so I tell them like, "Hey, daddy's working on changing his tone. So, if I say something in a tone of voice that you don't really like, please let me know." And that isn't a weakness as a father. That is actually letting them know that I am always trying to improve, which is a skill and a value I want them to see. And also that I'm a lifelong learner, which is a critical skill now as our kids grow up in the 21st century. So for all these reasons, I think it's really important.
Okay. So, you kind of alluded to this just a second ago, and as you were talking, I was thinking about it. What's a tip that you can give us so that we can better prepare for these big conversations? I know you mentioned ChatGPT, but and which I think is cool. What's something else that we can do? Is there anything like internally, emotionally we can do?
I mean, absolutely. So, a couple of things is to recognize when we're having big emotions around a topic, chances are that's because we're triggered by it, meaning that we didn't have the right sort of experience in our own childhood learning about this topic. And so we need to give ourselves some grace and the opportunity to explore that a little bit. Um, Sometimes, depending on how sort of negatively reactive we feel about a topic, how much fear we have with a topic, with a therapist, and otherwise with your partner or with other dads. I think that's really, really important because the more you explore why this topic is hard for you, the more you might recognize that this isn't that for your child. It's a whole new topic for your child, and your child isn't triggered by the topic yet. So I think really looking deeply at like, is this about me? Is there something for me that is really difficult about this topic? And then pragmatically, I think I already answered it. It's about practicing. It's
Mhm.
about potentially having a script that you get from ChatGPT. It's about doing that practice with your co-parent, um, practicing in any context that works. I mean, we are never too old to be rehearsing things that we find important in conversations. I mean, I am a public speaker in so many settings, and I remember early on because I was good at it, I thought I didn't need to practice, and then I realized the more I practice, like I become even better. And so we're all capable and required in some respects to practice a little if we think it's that important. So that's the other
Mhm.
thing.
Yeah, no, I mean, practice is important. It just kind of, to look at the average sports analogy, you have like these amazing athletes who are out there at the elite level at the NFL and the NBA, and they practice
Yeah.
almost every day so that they can perform on the court. It's not really that different for us as dads, right?
It's a great example, yeah.
Okay, cool. What's one of the big mistakes that you see dads making when it comes to having these big emotional conversations? What are some of the pitfalls that we need to see and avoid?
Well, I think I mentioned several of them, but, to add a new one, it's this expectation that you have to get it right the first time. So maybe that puts too much pressure on yourself, right? Like, we don't have to get it right. We can start the conversation, right? And then using that repair method if we screw up, or just saying like, "Hey, that was a good, it's a good question you asked back to me about sex or about this. I don't really know how to respond. Like, give me a little bit and I'll get back to you on it." Like recognizing that in these sort of meaningful conversations. Um, we don't have to bat 1,000 on our first try, right?
Mhm.
Like that's what kids are so great with is like, accepting apologies and trying again. So I think again, that's another one that might be a hang up for us in these big conversations.
Right, and then, of course, like, I guess, like, the biggest problem is we're too afraid to have the conversation in the first place. Again, because, like you said, we're triggered by whatever that topic is. We just kinda have to be brave enough to explore it ourselves mentally and emotionally, and then try to figure out how to relay all of that to our kids. And another thing that I hear you saying is we don't have to get it right the first time, but this also says you don't have this conversation once. You have it continually, right?
Yeah, that's the other thing. It like especially the bigger topics, right? Like you don't want you there's all you could probably remember like, "Oh, my parents talked to me once about sex at the dinner table and it was a disaster." Like, well, why did they stop at once, right? Like,
Mhm.
of course, right? And they probably well, they didn't have Chat GPT to prepare for that conversation or nor did they probably practice themselves. And we're suggesting all of these things and we're suggesting that this conversation should be ongoing. And so maybe in terms of a small step, if you're really intimidated about certain conversations, you just start the conversation. You don't script out and have the full conversation in that first meal, right? And also, one of the best ways to start difficult conversations with your kids is to ask them what they already think or know about the topic, right? Put it like on them to let you know where the starting point is. That can be hugely helpful.
Yeah, I like that because you could, if they're already, at 50% understanding of whatever it is and you think they're at 0, I mean, they're gonna just kinda roll their eyes for the first half of that conversation, like, "Oh, I already know this. My dad's explaining to me things I already got." So, yeah, I like that seeing where they are because 1, they may have a really good understanding of what's going on, or 2, they may believe a few myths that you've gotta step in and correct that otherwise you wouldn't have known.
Yeah, and, makes me think too, there are also several aspects of different topics now that our children may know a lot more about than we do. Like, I mean,
Mhm.
I don't wanna date myself, but, like, sex and dating, like, the different categories of this are so much more varied now than when I was growing up. So, I need to be prepared to understand how it's being taught differently now, what questions might differ from the ones that, like, would be front of mind for me. Same with, like, social media topics. I mean, if you're only on Facebook because 'cause you're, an old dad, that's not gonna be good enough for these conversations, right? So, it's important that we do our homework.
We were talking about having like this, these big conversations or whatever, because chances are, as we were growing up, like you said, we only had one conversation about something and then that was it. So, my question to you is there a blueprint for the perfect way to handle this conversation, or does it really come down to being organic and listening?
No, I think it comes down to your child. All our children are very different. So it comes down to, you know how long you can sit in front of your child and have an engaging conversation based on their age, based on their personality, based on the topic. I really think you need to design it around that. And then obviously the complexity of the topic, right?
Hmm.
You know, and as I said, also getting input from them. So hearing from them, like, here are 4 things that I heard at school that I have no idea what they are, and they tell you, and you're like, "Oh, I am not ready to respond to these, but thank you for sharing, and we'll talk about some of these the next time." Like, all of that is okay. All of that is okay.
Hmm.
There is definitely not one process.
So, I mean, I think it's good that we are talking about today that we have to understand what bothers us about these conversations and not to make us afraid of that sort of thing. A lot of people will come to me and they'll ask like, "Hey, Andy, like when should my kid join social media or when should my kid get a smartphone?" Does age really matter in these big milestone moments or is it as a parent, as a dad, do we need to look at it and say it's more about where my kid is in the world?
I think it's, yeah, that, yes, and your family's values and, right? So and also your community's values, right? We have some schools, some classes saying, we're gonna sign a sheet and no one's gonna get, promising not to get a phone before age,
Mhm,
15 or 16, but then it comes down to your family too. For sure, there's no hard and fast way. Um, I think the evidence is overwhelming the negative effect of these technologies on our young kids and even on teenagers. But it's also impossible to avoid.
mhm,
So you have to balance these two things. And again, this comes back to understanding your child, understanding the way you all engage with one another. I think that movie Adolescence, which won
mhm,
all these
mhm,
awards, is an unbelievably powerful example of how we do need to take more responsibility when our children are quietly engaging on their own with technology. And yeah, it is scary and it is hard and it requires more effort from us as dads
right,
and as parents. And that's part of the job in the 21st century. And we need to recognize that and that it requires research,
mhm,
and it requires conversation with your partner if you have one, with your co-parent if they're not the part, like, because it also goes downhill if one parent that you live with is
mhm,
saying
mhm.
yes, this is all fine, and the other is saying no. And again, that situation can also be difficult and unavoidable. But these are all things we need to weigh.
Right. And that kind of your response is great and it kind of leads me to my next question. How can dads create a home where these hard, tough conversations are not scary and they're not unusual either?
I love that question. It's about, I like to call it like these default home settings where if you want to have more frequent, if you want to be prepared for the more difficult conversations, you need to have built a culture in your house of more regular reflection and conversation. So in my house, for instance, it was really important to me because I'm a dork, and the research says that gratitudes and saying gratitudes on a daily basis are hugely powerful for developing a positive mindset and resilience and all these things. And so, um, if I just said, "Okay, we're going to do gratitudes at dinner," like I know it would have lasted 1 or 2 weeks. So
Hmm.
I thought to myself for a while, and I got this actually idea at a conference. um, I'm going to put like a big physical reminder for us to do this every night at the dinner table. So I bought like a stencil, like a decal of a wallpaper of a tree, and I call it the gratitude tree. And it's youngish. It's got like little animals on it. It looks sort of Disneyish, and I put it on the wall in the dining room. And so every time we're eating, which is every night, I stare at that tree and it makes me go, "Oh, it's time to talk about our gratitudes from the day." And that has created a consistency of conversation that brings up topics, and it's not just gratitudes, right? Like, in the context of knowing that my boys always have to talk about something like this, there'll be little clues that come up about other conversations or other experiences they had in school, and it opens up the door to talk about them. So those sort of physical reminders um, are an example of what I call like a default home or a default culture to enable that. And there are a million other ways to do it that aren't physical. It could be that every day after you pick your kids up from the bus or they arrive home, you sit down and have tea, or you sit down and have your snack and you have a certain set conversation around a whole bunch of things. Another one that I know people do are called rosebud thorn. So, rose is like, what was kind of your highlight from today? Bud, what are
Hmm.
you looking forward to the rest of the week? And thorn, like, what thing kind of went wrong today or that you're feeling frustrated about? All sorts of um, consistent conversation prompts that
Mhm.
add so much value and make it so much easier for those more difficult conversations down the road.
I like that a lot, and of course, you could also probably go to ChatGPT and say, "Hey, what are some things that I could talk to my kid about?" or whatever, or just some general
Totally.
conversation things. And by the way, it's funny you've brought this up a couple of times. I math is math hates me, and I feel the same way about it. And so my son brought home pre-algebra last year, and, like, some of the beginning stuff, I was like, "Oh, yeah, I remember this. We could do this, whatever." And then there got to be, too many numbers and letters mixed together, and then I was like, "Man, I don't know what to do now." So we took it to ChatGPT, and I said, "Okay, what is this?" And not only did it give us the answer, it broke down how the problem was done. And so it was this great moment of him getting to see, okay, my dad didn't know what to do, but he used this tool to figure it out, and now we both know together. And while I think a lot of people would have been embarrassed to say, "Oh, I don't know how to do this," it was, I think, a good learning opportunity, 1, because I could remember algebra, but 2, for him to see what I did in the event that I didn't know what to do.
Yeah. But I think that also leads to what you mentioned in there that too many dads feel shame for not being able to have the answer to a son or daughter's question, and we rightfully shouldn't have the answers to all these questions. The amount of things that are changing and the amount of new things that are out there, right? From technology to education to, as we're talking about, the conversations we need to have. No one in their right mind is prepared and ready for all of this stuff. And again, it comes down to, if you want to connect best with your kids, being vulnerable is the way to do it. And saying, like, I'm not really sure, let's figure it out together, is not disappointing to your child. It's actually a wonderful way to develop connection with them. Like, two people having an aha moment together, there are very few ways that I can think of having greater bonding experience than that.
Yeah. Yeah, I know with men a lot, it's like the shared experience is what bonds us. And so,
Yeah.
like, in that moment, it was, okay, me and my son are gonna figure out this 7th grade algebra problem together. That's maybe is that the equivalent the equivalent now of, like, fixing the car, like that used to be in the garage or whatever,
Yeah,
even though he
seriously.
does help me work on the cars too. But yeah, just like that shared experience of, "Hey, man, we're gonna figure this thing out together one way or another."
Yeah, I love that way of describing it. It's about shared experience.
So, for dads who are listening today, what is one thing that we can do next week to improve our communication with our children?
I think maybe the previous question alluded to it. It's like, okay, it's not about um preparing for that big conversation that's, around the corner around sex or social media or what have you. It's, how do I create a culture in my house of communication, right? And what are some different ways to do that? What are some different rituals that you can create? And there are so many out there, and again, you can chat GPT them. I mentioned a couple. Another one that I really love is having like a question box that you create like out of a shoebox and have a bunch of profound questions in there for your kids. And then you pull one out a night as you're putting them to bed. And like, it's just about the habit, right? Of having even if it's just one deep question to have a conversation about, that is setting the stage for much easier conversations down the road.
I like that, Jeff. I like that a lot. So, like, if people want to know more about you, your research, and what you're doing, where can they find you online?
Uh, Two places. One, I have a podcast called the Ambitious Dads Podcast, so please come and check us out. And then also the just come to my website, ambitiousdads.com. You can hear more about the programs I run, and I write a lot of articles as well. You can check those out. And I'd love to hear from people.
That is awesome, man. I appreciate you. I appreciate what you're doing. You're having these conversations with men like me and other folks, and it's absolutely so needed as we have discussed here today, man. Best of luck in what you're doing.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.